Coming up, former Prime Minister David Cameron texted government ministers to arrange chats over drinks to lobby for Greensill, the finance firm from which he stood to earn millions of pounds through his influence over his ministerial ex-colleagues. And this is just the tip of the iceberg of sleaze, corruption and cronyism in Johnson's government. Keep watching. Before we get into it, please remember to like, subscribe and get notified of new videos every Wednesday and Saturday. Most famous for allegedly being filleted by a pig's head, ex-Tory Prime Minister David Cameron began working as an advisor to Greensill Capital 2 years after he stepped down as Prime Minister. This, despite the fact that he had no previous experience or background in finance. The government has now announced a formal review into his activities as a lobbyist, trying to raise COVID-related payments and loans from government for his employer. But this review will have no power of sanction and no legal force. In fact, it looks like the government's strategy is A, to throw Cameron under the bus. Well, they've got no other use for it, now that the lie about 350 million a week has done its job. And B, to limit the review purely to Cameron and Greensill, so as to distract attention from the wider picture of money in politics and the lobbying system as a whole. Labour is warning that the review looks like a Tory cover-up of sleaze, cronyism and corruption. And it's true that there may be plenty of government ministers who would rather their conversations with Cameron were not made public. Rishier than the Queen's Sunak, for one. Michael Gove for another. Funny how this gruesome twosome have been keeping such a low profile since the Greensill revelations broke. Campaign group Transparency International have said that an inquiry should cover the lack of transparency in lobbying, the revolving door between government and the private sector, and proper enforcement of the ministerial code. And on that subject, check out our recent video on 10 Tory cabinet ministers who have broken the code and yet are still in post. That's a separate scandal all on its own. But back to the Greensill review. Nigel Boardman has been appointed to head the review. This guy is a senior consultant at a multinational law firm that previously lobbied the Cameron administration not to make changes to the current lobbying register laws back in 2013. You couldn't make it up, could you? I think Labour's Rachel Reeves, who shadows Michael Gove, put it best when she said, "This is a government mired in cronyism and scandal. It's not good enough for the Conservatives to appoint an inquiry head from an organisation that lobbied to limit the scope of the register." And of course, this is just the latest incident in a whole series of corruption scandals dogging Johnson's government. Dormat Hancock's department spent £15 billion on PPE contracts by October last year, but only £2.68 billion worth of those contracts have been published. This is illegal, as the government is required to publish all contracts over 10k within 30 days, and the High Court ruled Hat Mancock to be breaking this law. Back to that ministerial code again. It's a scandal this man is still in a job. And what is he hiding? I mean, apart from that £30 million PPE contract awarded to his inexperienced friend who was his local pub landlord. Oh, and apart from him being handed a 20% stake in a firm called Topwood Limited, who were awarded 2 NHS contracts worth a total of 300k in March this year. And Topwood Limited also just happened to be owned by Mr. Hancock's sister. It's a disgrace. Bear in mind, the New York Times, who have no skin in the game in the UK, identified thousands of contracts handed out by the Tories to fight the pandemic, some of them in a secretive VIP lane, to a select few companies with connections to the Conservative Party. The New York Times analysis identified deals that had been made public, together worth nearly £16 billion, and of that, about £8 billion went to companies either run by Tory friends and associates, or with no prior experience, or with a history of controversy. Added to that, the Murdoch-owned The Times newspaper has suggested that there is ample evidence of cronyism, waste and poor due diligence in the award of these COVID-related contracts. Added to this, the chair of the government's own lobbying watchdog, ex-cabinet minister Eric Pickles, has been accused of a potential conflict of interest for failing to publicly declare his ongoing involvement in a Tory business lobbying forum. Tory Sleaze, policed by someone up to their neck in sleaze themselves. Then we have John Penrose, appointed as the government's anti-corruption czar, married of course to Dido Harding, who heads up the failed track and trace system which has handed out £37 billion and counting to Tory-associated firms like Serco, Deloitte, Randox and so on. Then there's Robert Jenrick, who did a you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours deal with junior colleague Jake Berry to sign off multi-million-pound grants to each other's wealthy constituencies from the Towns Fund, which was set up for deprived communities. And then there's Wurzel Blojo Johnson himself, handing over £126,000 to his lover, Jennifer Arcuri, amongst a raft of dodgy deals with donors and cronies stretching back over his entire political career.